Welcome, everyone, to Hayden Lake Seventh-day Adventist Church. We are very excited to have Miss O'Neill here. We have watched her in Australia for many years. She has traveled all over the world. To know what she went through to get here tonight is astounding. The Lord has performed many miracles, so we are very blessed. There is a live stream for anybody who wants to tell friends or family. On the bottom of the bulletin here is the link to the live stream. And I'll have a blessing, and then we'll introduce Miss O'Neill. Bow your heads. Dear Heavenly Father, again, we thank you so much for all the blessings that you give to us. We thank you for your health message that shows us how our bodies work, that we can be healthy, that we don't have to be afraid, and that we can take care of ourselves through the wisdom that you give. I pray for you to anoint Barbara tonight with your Holy Spirit to guide her, to give us the information that each and every one of us needs so badly. I thank you for all that you do for us. Bless us. Help us to be able to focus and comprehend all that you want us to know and to apply the things that you are teaching us through your strength and your power. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Barbara. So this is Barbara O'Neill. And so Barbara has been in Europe. Then she had to go to Mexico. She's been teaching all over Europe. So tell us a little bit about where you've been lately.
Well, I left home on the 2nd of April. And Australia and New Zealand have an agreement with the US that we have a 2-year visa waiver program. So I have got a 2-year visa, but I have to leave every 3 months. So after 3 months, the only country not in lockdown was Mexico. And when I got back, they said, we don't accept Mexico. You have to leave. You have to leave for Europe. So I went to Europe, had to change a lot of plans. And I've been in Europe for a couple of months. And then when I got to Frankfurt to fly back here, they said, only American citizens can come into the US. Well, so then my daughter and my husband are finding out what we can do, and we discovered that if I went to Mexico for 2 weeks, I might be able to get back into the US. So for the 2 weeks that I was in Mexico, I did not know. My grandson's getting married in Wisconsin next Sunday, so we had a lot of people praying that I might get back. And when I got to the airport, I got some good news and bad news. They said, here's your boarding pass for tomorrow. You can't go today because you have to be here 14 days. I said, this is the 14th day. They said, you have to be here for the whole of the 14th day. So I went home happy that I actually had a boarding pass, and a lot of people text me, have your feet touched American soil? Yes. So we thank God for all of that.
Now, how long have you had the health retreat in Australia?
We've had a health retreat in Australia. Let's say Michael and I have been married for almost 25 years. And we started the health retreat 1 year after we were married. So that would be about 24 years. We've had Misty Mountain Health Retreat.
Yeah, and so currently with the lockdowns and everything, how is everything going for you right now?
We have a program running right at this moment. We have a great team of staff, and they're running the program. But the lockdown ended midnight on Friday, so we're only able to get 2 guests in. And that's the lockdown just in our area. So there's still lockdown from state to state.
Well, I'll let you start your series, and tonight we are going to be hearing about reversing diabetes and how to strengthen the heart and conquer high blood pressure. So, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. So, overcoming diabetes, what you'll learn tonight, you need never have diabetes. And if you have diabetes, what I'm going to show you tonight is how you can conquer diabetes. I believe that the human body was designed to heal itself, and it will heal itself if you give it the right conditions. Unfortunately, today, many people do not know those conditions. They do not know what they are. And I'm sure you all realize that you can't believe everything on the television, is that right? In fact, you can hardly believe anything at the moment that's on television. And so the ads and the things that you hear are not actually accurate. Now, I believe that everyone should be their own doctor, because only you know how you feel, only you know what you've been through, and only you know how your body responds or reacts to things. So what I present is some basic principles. And I present principles that we have seen have incredible effects. In fact, human bodies are constantly surprising me in how quickly they start to respond and to heal once they're given the right conditions. In the little book, Ministry of Healing, one of my first and still one of my favourite health books, Ellen White says the only hope of better things is the education of people in the right principles. And I think that's absolutely right. And that is the main aim of our health retreat that we have been running in Australia for many years now. It's actually to teach. See, our aim is that when the people learn what to do, they will go home and we say, we hope we never see you again. Actually, we'd love to see you again. But what we mean is, our hope is that you'll go home, you'll implement this, and you need never actually have to come to Misty Mountain again. By the way, many do come for their yearly holidays because they say they go home feeling so good. We've had people come to our retreat. One man, when he came, I said, "What's your reason for coming?" He said, "Well, I'm here because I met a man last week who had cancer, came to Misty Mountain, and now he has no cancer." I said, "Really?" Some of them we don't even hear back on them. Often when people are doing so well, they forget to say, "Hey, by the way, I don't have cancer anymore." Sometimes we hear back. But our main role, I believe, is to teach. And I love teaching people how to be their own doctors. So, diabetes. To understand diabetes, we need to have a look at what are the main causes of diabetes. So what would be the main causes of diabetes? Well, Hippocrates, he's the father of medicine, that's 400 years BC, no mention of diabetes in his writings. And then the little book Sugar Blues by William Dufty, he gives a very interesting history of sugar. And he shows that there was no diabetes until sugar was well established. There's nothing wrong with a sugar cane. But if you realise that 1 metre of sugar cane delivers 1 teaspoon of sugar, and there's approximately 10 teaspoons of refined sugar in 1 can of Coke. So if you tried to eat 10 metres of sugar cane in a day, you could not, or your jaw might break in the process. In other words, this is a highly refined drug, and that is not the way God meant us to eat it. God created the sugar cane, that's right, but it was man that extracted the refined sugar from it. So absolutely one of the contributing factors is sugar. So why is that so? Let me show you what it does. When sugar goes into the body, it basically dumps a whole lot of glucose all at once, whereas if the person was eating sugar cane, the fibre in the sugar cane, have you ever eaten sugar cane? Takes you about half an hour to get through 2 inches. So all that fibre that the glucose is locked up in, it slowly releases the glucose. But when it's all dumped in at once, you get a blood sugar level high. Goes up very high, very fast. And so when it goes up so high, fast, the brain says, overload. Pancreas, quick, release insulin. And insulin's the key that unlocks the door to get the glucose into the cell, because we've got to get it out of the blood. And by the way, diabetes mellitus means sugar in the urine. So if the body can't get all this glucose into the cell, it'll start spinning out, or spilling out into the urine. So that's what diabetes mellitus means. So what happens is the insulin's released, and high glucose demands high insulin. And so very quickly what the insulin does, it gets it out of the blood, and I'm going to show you the process in more detail in a minute, out of the blood and into several places, which gets the blood sugar level where? Down. Now it's too low because high insulin came in response to high glucose, in fact probably a bit too much. So now it's too low. And that's why William Dufty called his book Sugar Blues. Because what does sugar cause? What was that called down there? The blues. Now we're too low. And so what does the body do when it's down there? Have a bit more sugar. have a soda drink. You call it candy, is that right? We call it lolly in Australia. Or a cup of coffee with 3 teaspoons of sugar. Will that get it up? Oh yes. But now we're up too high. More insulin, too low. Can you see this whiplash? Up, down, up, down, up, down. But there's something else that's coming in as well. And that is something that might surprise you. And it is the hybridized wheat. Wheat? America grows a lot of wheat, doesn't it? Australia grows a lot of wheat. And when I was a little girl, the wheat used to grow this high. I was in Holland a few weeks ago, and I was looking at all these fields, because Holland's very flat. I went from Holland to Italy, and that's northern Italy's like that. It was going like from one extreme to the other. But there were huge fields, and it was a dusky, sandy coloured crop, and it only grew maybe a foot high. I said, "What's that crop?" They said, "Wheat." What happened to the wheat? Well, it was in the 1950s, wheat went through intensive crossbreeding. They put it through intensive crossbreeding to produce a plant with a high yield of grain. This was to help in the starvation crisis in Africa, Mexico, India. So for a noble cause, one would say. And because it was just wheat, and they didn't think, how can wheat ever be harmful? It was rushed through no safety studies. Sounds like the COVID vaccine, doesn't it? Rushed through with no safety studies. In, I think it was about 1970, Dr. Norman Bourlag got a Nobel Prize for his hybridized wheat. You see, this wheat can give 6 times more grain per plant. That means 6 times more grain per acre. So in the 1970s, this wheat went worldwide. Oh, how the farmers love it. In fact, it only grows this high. Why only that high? Well, when it still grew that high, before the grain ripened, the stalk would break because it was too heavy for the tall stalk. So they went back to the drawing board and they created a plant that only grew this high with a very thick stem so it could hold that heavy load of grain. Oh, how the farmers loved it. No wonder it just took off. They've got to pay their bills. This is 6 times more grain per acre. What's that? 6 times more money per acre. No wonder. And it only grew this high, so in some areas they could have 2 crops a season. So by the 1990s, what have we got? Every pasta, every pizza, every wheat, bread, all your whole wheats, all made out of the hybridized wheat. So let's make a list of that. So this is our carbohydrate list. And our carbohydrate list is basically all the starches, which are the sugars. So most people for breakfast have cereal, yeah? And most cereals are wheat. And bread. There's a whole aisle devoted to cereal and a whole aisle devoted to bread. We know they're popular. And mid-morning, the person's got to reach for more because it didn't take them very far. So I'm going to say cakes, etc., because this takes into consideration all the pastries. So there's your muffins, your croissants. You call them cookies, we call them biscuits. But I think a biscuit for you is like a scone, is that right? So when us Aussies see biscuit and gravy, we think of cookies and gravy. See, we think these Americans, they eat strangely. Who would put gravy on it? Well, we call cookies biscuits, but I understand now. Also, what's big in America, which is not very big in Australia, is pretzels. And pasta, I think pasta's very big everywhere. Pizza. And rice. Rice is another high carbohydrate. You've also got potatoes, or your chips, potato chips. You also call them French fries, yeah. And last and certainly least in nutritive value is the pure crystallized acid that's extracted from the sugarcane plant. Would you agree with me that Americans have become high carbohydrate consumers? Now, I don't think anyone ever chose to eat this way. It's just there. And we're such a fast society today, we reach for something quick. This is all very quick. It's all very quick. And how many of these are out of wheat? So you would say, here's wheat, 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 wheat. In fact, the majority is out of the wheat. Now, all of these foods break down in the gastrointestinal tract to glucose. And once it breaks down to glucose, it's fed into the pancreas. And the pancreas, it releases insulin, yep. Especially when you've got high glucose, as I just showed you. High glucose causes a release of high insulin. Now the pancreas releases another hormone, and that is glucagon. And glucagon is the hormone designed to get the blood glucose levels up again. So insulin gets it down, and glucagon gets it up again. So the pancreas releases two main hormones, and it's designed to balance blood glucose levels. But with this high glucose release, there's a few places that insulin is released to get that glucose out of the blood. So let's have a look at the cell. And it's important to look at the cell to understand what happens here, because we are just a bunch of cells, aren't we? In fact, 100 trillion of them. And to understand how the body works, we need to know, we need to go right into the inside of the cell. I call it the CBD, Central Business District of the human body. So the glucose gets into the cell under the action of insulin. In the presence of insulin, the glucose goes into the cell. Now, the first place it will go is to the energy cycle. And it'll go into a 20-step pathway, and this 20-step pathway gives us 2 units of energy. And isn't that why we eat? To get energy for every single cell in the body to run. Now, the chemical form of glucose that comes out of that 20-step pathway gets fed into the 8-step pathway. And the 8-step pathway delivers a very impressive 36 units of energy. So why does a 20-step pathway only give us 2 and an 8-step pathway give us 36? The difference is oxygen. This pathway uses oxygen, this pathway uses no oxygen. What a difference oxygen makes. Oh, I'm so happy to be in Idaho where you don't have to wear a mask all the time. How much oxygen are you getting when you wear a mask? I don't know whether you've read of some lung specialists who say that in the next couple of years we're going to have a lot more lung problems. God designed us to be breathing in pure air and breathing out our waste, not breathing back in our waste. And look at the ramifications of this. When people are lacking oxygen, they're actually lacking energy, which means chronic fatigue syndrome is going to start rising. Because chronic fatigue syndrome is lack of oxygen at the cellular level. Now, there can be a whole lot of reasons for that. But what I'm showing you right now is the journey of glucose. Only so much glucose can go through the energy cycles in the cell. And on a high carbohydrate diet, we've still got a lot left over. And so now it is the liver that determines where it goes. The liver causes it to be stored inside the cell, particularly the muscle cell, like a little bunch of grapes. And that's called glycogen. So let's have a look at this. The first place that the glucose is sent is to the cell. The second place it is sent is to be stored as glycogen. Glycogen is a name given to quick-release glucose stores, and I believe it is one of the diabetics' best-kept secrets. And we will understand that a little bit more as I go through this. So number one, it gets sent to the cell. Number two, it gets stored as glycogen, quick-release glucose stores, already sitting in the muscle cell, just waiting to be plucked and put through the energy cycle when we need it. But we've still got a lot of glucose left over on this high carbohydrate diet. And so the third place that the glucose gets stored is the most amazing fuel depot in the human body. It's called fat cells. And what's happening to Americans on this high carbohydrate diet? What's the size like? They're getting bigger and bigger. 20 years ago, when I visited the US, I could get a dress or a skirt in most shops. Now I have to go to the petite section. And in Australia, my skirt size might be size 8, but here it's size 2 or 4. They've changed the sizes. And there is a very famous doctor. He's dead now, but his book was number 1 on the New York Times best-selling list 4 years running. You may have heard of him. His name Dr. Robert Atkins. And you might say, well, we've certainly heard of that man. Meat, butter, cream cheese, eggs, is that right? And Barbara, aren't you a plant-based eater? I certainly am a plant-based eater. But I want to mention him because he did something that rocked the nutrition world. He knew his science, and I've just given you the science, that the high carbohydrate diet, it goes through these 3 processes. You see, fat doesn't make you fat. It's a misconception. And we will hear that a little bit more also in our next lecture on the heart. And when we look at that lecture, you know what we'll also find? That fat doesn't cause heart disease. Whoa! Have I got proof? Lots of it. And so Dr. Robert Atkins was putting on a bit of weight. And he was in his late 40s, 50s, so he decided to do an experiment on himself. He decided to stop all the carbohydrates. So what did he eat? Meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs. We certainly know that. But he also ate 3 cups of vegetables a day because he knew that if he didn't, things would get stuck in his gastrointestinal fat tract. Is that right? We need to sweep it every day. There's the fibre. So he did this. The weight just fell off him. Why? This should be on the tip of our lips at every stage. Why? Newton's third law of motion states that to every action there's an equal and an opposite reaction. And Rudyard Kipling, he wrote a whole poem on that, but I'll just give you the first stanza. I have 6 trusty serving men. They taught me all I know. Their names are what, why, when, where, how, and who. Why? We should always know why. Why was Atkins losing so much weight? Well, if he wasn't giving his body this glucose, his liver was able to break down fat stores to give the glucose he needed. It's called gluconeogenesis, creating new glucose from the stores. And his liver could convert protein in his food and fat in his food to glucose if it needed it. So the weight fell off him. He had heaps of energy because of this. He was never hungry. There's 3 things that keep the food in the stomach longer: fibre, protein and fat. Fibre because it slowly releases the glucose, protein because it's in the stomach that protein is broken down, and fat because it coats the food and takes a little bit longer to break down. It takes our stomach, on a balanced average meal, it takes 3.5 to 4 hours to digest. And then the stomach loves an hour's rest. So we should be leaving 5, 6 hours between meals. But on the high carbohydrate diet, that's almost impossible because it's so deficient in protein, fibre and fat that the person's hungry all day long. And that's, of course, one of the reasons Atkins diet was so popular. People were not hungry. After a year, Atkins noticed something. His diabetic patients were coming off their medication. This is type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Scratched his head. And as he looked at it, he realised on this low carbohydrate, high fibre, generous protein, good fats, the pancreas was getting a break. You see, when it's up, down, the pancreas is getting screamed at all day long. I'm against child abuse, I'm against animal abuse, and I'm against pancreatic abuse. That's like someone's kicking their dog every day and not realising it's hurting it. Just makes no sense at all. You know, common sense isn't very common today. It defies reason. Can you get the results that Atkins got on a vegetarian diet? You can. You absolutely can, and I will show you that. But first of all, I want to show you what they are discovering today, the effect of the wheat on our pancreas. Remember I said it was rushed through, no safety studies? What they discovered that in the hybridization of the wheat, a starch was created that is not naturally in the wheat. It's called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast. Just like this. High up, high down. Let me give you something to compare it to. Let's look at amylopectin B. Amylopectin B is found in bananas and potatoes, and if you're familiar with the glycemic index of foods, that's how quickly a certain food will release glucose into the blood. And for a diabetic, the glycemic index can make a big difference. Well, bananas and potatoes are high on the glycemic index list. They release glucose quickly in. So what does your B do? Your B is not as high and not as fast and not as low. Okay? So there's your B. That's your amylopectin B. Whereas your amylopectin A, very high, very fast. What about amylopectin C? Amylopectin C is found in chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans, lentils. So there's your beans or your legumes. Now amylopectin C, let's do a green for that one, that gives, let's say this is baseline here, it gives a nice steady rise, a nice steady maintenance, and a nice steady drop. Every cell in the body desires and requires a nice steady, consistent delivery of fuel. No dramatic highs, no dramatic lows. I was talking to a scientist, he was 69. He came to one of our retreats in Alabama. He said, 20 years ago, I was told that I was pre-diabetic. And I was told that if I ate legumes every day, it would help me. He said, I did, and I do. And he said, and I never developed diabetes. I said, it was good advice. That gives a nice, steady, sure delivery of fuel. That's what every single cell in the body wants. In fact, they're calling Alzheimer's diabetes type 3. Have you heard that? And you know why? because the organ that's affected most by these dramatic highs and lows is the brain. How's the brain up here? Bypassed. How's the brain down there? Lights are on and no one's home. The brain cells consume 15 times the glucose of any other cell. So the brain particularly requires this steady, sure, consistent delivery of fuel. Now, what I'm about to tell you is shocking, but I'm telling you the truth. And you can check this out. There's a book called Wheat Belly by Dr. William Davis. I think in your program it might have that written down. And he tells the story of what happened to wheat. And he shows this amylopectin, the different starches. So let's look at the glycemic index of foods. Now, baseline of glycemic index is 55. Anything below 55 is considered low GI. That means lower delivery of fuel. So good news for the diabetics. So where do cherries sit? Cherries, and you could say really all your berries, they sit at about 25. Grapefruit, it's not going to be high, I think we know that. I think that sits at about 24, so they're good fruits for a diabetic. Where does sugar sit? So sugar sits at about 59. So this is high. Where does white bread? White bread, white cereal, it sits at 69. Ooh! A slice of white bread will get the blood sugar level up higher than refined sugar. Eee. And how many of these are combinations of the white flour and the white sugar? Your cereal, your breads, they put sugar in bread to make the yeast rise, your cakes, your pretzels. And you'd be surprised how many pastries that are even savoury pastries that have some sugar in it. Because sugar is a highly addictive substance. I'm glad you're sitting down because the next information is shocking. Whole wheat. Whole wheat bread, 72. How could whole wheat bread get the blood sugar level up higher than white bread? Because the whole wheat has fibre. Well, because it hasn't been refined, it's got more amylopectin A in it. And it's the amylopectin A that gets the blood sugar level up high and fast. Can you see that? My husband said, Barbara, what have you said? I've just got this lady saying, Barbara says white bread's better than whole wheat bread. I said, where did that come from? I think it's from here. Now, whole wheat bread has more fibre. Yes. It has more B vitamins. Yes. But in relation to blood sugar levels, no, I'm not suggesting that you buy white bread. What did that nutritionist say? The whiter the bread, the sooner you're dead. It's got almost totally deficient in nutrients, and nutrients our body needs. But you can get ancient grains today. You can get grains that have not been hybridized. You can get some wheat grains from the original wheat. In fact, the original wheat is called Einkhorn, or sometimes I call it just Einkhorn. Einkhorn, Einkhorn. And you can also get the Emmer grain, Emmer, and that's a wild hybrid from the original Einkhorn. But probably the easiest one to buy now is spelt. One lady said, how do you spell that? Spelt. And also kamut. Kamut is another ancient grain. These grains have not been hybridized. So for the diabetic, they're the grains to use. You can get spelt pasta, you can get spelt flour, you can get many things that are made out of the spelt. So what I am doing right now is I am presenting to you my case. Presenting to you what are the things that are causing these diabetes to be out of control. And I'd like to suggest it is. In Australia, 500 new cases a day are being diagnosed. And there's been diabetes around since sugar was refined, but if you have a look at the timeline, so this hybridized wheat, hybridized in the 70s, went worldwide in the 90s, it's really since then that diabetes has just exploded. And when you understand what the hybridization of the wheat did to the starch structure, that explains so much. Now, carbohydrates are not bad. What a relief. My husband would never forgive me if the potatoes stopped. Carbohydrates are not bad. It's only when they're overdone and refined. And for the diabetic, they need to be particularly mindful of this. So what I'd like to now is show you the role that exercise plays. What is the role that exercise plays in diabetes? It plays a major role. And the type of exercise that is the most effective is the high-intensity interval training. So the high-intensity interval training, as the name implies, these are intervals of high intensity. So what's high intensity? Anything that gets your heart rate up and you're breathing to the point where you can't even hold a conversation with your exercise mate at the moment. But what they have shown is all you need to do is 30 seconds. And if you don't think that's very long, try running up a hill with all your might for 30 seconds. After 20 seconds, your body will begin to protest. After 25 seconds, it'll really protest, and after 30 seconds, you're going to feel like you're dying. That's the sort of exercise that you need. Now, the reason why that sort of exercise is necessary, it causes a massive influx of blood into every single cell in the body, and this is also your pancreatic cells. Your pancreatic cells revive because Leviticus 17:11 states that the life of the flesh is in the blood. You see, more blood is more life. More blood is more nutrients, more oxygen, more water, carrying away waste. It is the blood that is the healer, so that anything that increases blood is going to increase healing to any part of the body. So number one, it will increase blood supply to the pancreas, starting to revive the pancreas. Number two, it will increase the ability of insulin and glucose to get into the cell. Have you heard of insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is a result of too much carbohydrate, too much glucose, to the point that the cell says, I'm sick of the sight of you. And it develops insulin resistance. So the insulin can't get in, it can't get the glucose in, so the glucose remains high. The brain sees that the glucose is still high, so it starts screaming even more at the pancreas, more insulin, and eventually the pancreas says, I'm done. I'm done. No more. So insulin resistance usually precedes diabetes. So how to turn that around is the high-intensity interval training. With high-intensity interval training, you know what the cell starts to say? More, more. Not enough, more. And then they haven't just had breakfast, so no fuel's coming. So you know what it starts to do? Pluck the glycogen stores. Remember, they're little molecules of glucose already sitting in your muscle cell. And when you start exercising and your cell needs more fuel, it'll pluck it, put it through, pluck it, put it through, pluck it, put it through. Remember what I said, that the glycogen stores are the diabetic's best kept secret. In fact, if they got a blood sugar level low, between a meal, they don't need to take a candy or a lolly, they just need to do 30 push-ups. Get on the exercise bike, get on the rebounder, and that'll cause a release of those. So this is what's happening in your 30 seconds high intensity. You twist it from going too much to we need more. So you know what the cell now does? It starts to develop extra insulin receptor sites. So if anyone has insulin resistance, I can tell you right now that what you'll hear today, you can turn that round in a matter of days. Isn't that good news? You can't run up hills? Exercise bike. Most of the research has been done on an exercise bike, especially for people whose hips, knees, ankles don't work very well. Then most of the weight is on the hip, and if they're a little unsteady on their feet, they're holding on, and you can go for it as fast as you can go. And then we've got recovery time. And recovery is cycling slowly. For me, it's walking down the hill. The research shows that the most effective form of recovery is not when you're sitting still. You're going to feel like doing this, but it's much better if you can do some sort of activity, but at a much lower pace. So at a much lower pace, which allows for recovery. So recovery time, your recovery time is your indicator of your fitness level. For people who are unfit, their recovery time might be 5 minutes. If your recovery time is 5 minutes, don't be concerned, because as you implement this, it's going to get less and less and less. That's good news. And it's usually done for a cycle of 6. 30 seconds high intensity, 6 recoveries. Okay, any mathematicians here? What's the maths on that? Let's be generous and say 15 minutes. How many hours in a day? 24 hours in a day. Sorry, no more excuse now that you haven't got time to exercise. If you can't quite do the 6, you do what you can. You start where you are. Dr. Al Sears, he wrote a book, PACE, and that's Progressive Acceleration of Cardiopulmonary Exertion. Progressive means this is progressive. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Acceleration, you are moving. Cardiopulmonary. Cardio strengthens the heart, as we're going to see in the next presentation. Pulmonary opens those lungs wide open. Exertion, you are exerting yourself. But what this type of exercise can do, it can help to turn diabetes around. So now let's make a list. Let's make a list of what you can do to turn diabetes around. Number 1, eliminate. If you don't turn off the tap, you're still going to be mopping up in the other corner. What do we eliminate? Now, you don't have to stop the carbs, but eliminate absolutely the refined sugar. That must go. Now, for a diabetic, they're best to eliminate even maple syrup and honey initially, until their pancreas starts to work a little bit better. Eliminate the hybridized wheat. This isn't the ancient grain. This is the hybridized wheat. Caffeine must be eliminated because caffeine causes an insulin response. It tricks the body into thinking it's a crisis. Like with a person that has 3 cups of coffee a day, that's like being confronted with 3 crises a day. How would you feel? It's not long before that coffee drinker has no energy at all. So there are some things that must be eliminated. Number 2, daily exercise. And ideally, the high-intensity interval training, and you implement that as you are able. And remember, muscle knows no age. Whether you're 9 or 90, you can have strong muscles. And if you think maybe you're in your 70s, 80s, you can't quite do it, it's time to watch the documentary on 100-year-old athletes. I don't think anyone here's 100, so no excuse there. Number 3, it's absolutely vital to have adequate water. I was talking to a mother, this was in April when I was in Oklahoma. And this couple came to me and they said, our little girl is a diabetic, she's 6. They said, we don't want to feed her between meals, but we have to because her blood sugar goes too low. And I said to them, I agree, it is best to let her stomach digest the breakfast or the lunch without putting more in. So I said to them, try this. If she gets a blood sugar level low, have a little crystal of Celtic salt. Now, Celtic salt, we'll look at salt in the next lecture in more detail. It has 82 minerals in it. And those minerals, as you'll see in my next lecture, that help to get the water into the cell. Have that little bit of salt and water. They said, is that all? I said, try it. Well, I saw them the next day. They came running up to me with this huge smile on their face. They said, it worked. It worked. Because they said, we've got 2 younger children, and when they see the little 6-year-old eating between meals, they want to eat between meals, and we don't want to feed the children between meals. They were very excited. That simple thing. So water and salt. Just that little tiny crystal about as big as a sesame seed, just a very small amount. What's also important is to go for low GI foods, low glycemic index foods. If you Google that, you can easily get a chart on that showing you which foods are low GI. That means nice, steady delivery of fuel. Go away from your high GI. Let me give you an illustration. White potatoes, high. Sweet potatoes, not. Sweet potatoes sits at about 55 or 54. How come? You can't see it with the naked eye, but under a microscope, the fibre structure of the white potato is very loose, so the glucose is released quickly. But under a microscope, the fibre structure of the sweet potato is very tight, so it's a slow release of glucose. It can be simple as that. See, cherries are low, bananas are high. Under a microscope, the same thing. It's to do with the fibre structure. So low GI foods are vital. Number 5, with the diet, you want low carbohydrate. So not no, but low. So does that mean that a diabetic can't eat potatoes at all? Well, instead of having 3 potatoes, have half a potato. Instead of having a whole banana on breakfast every day, maybe have half a banana every 3 days. So just a small amount. High. We want high fibre. Remember what fibre does? It slowly releases. So all your plant foods are high in fibre. Generous proteins. Now remember the proteins, your legumes, your lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, cannellini beans, and healthy fats. What are the healthy fats? I think we've got a lecture later in the week. It's called Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill, yeah? Fat as it comes from the hand of the Creator. Basically your avocados, your nuts and your seeds. And they're 2 oils that have been used for thousands of years. And both of these oils are extracted from the flesh of the plant. So women could easily extract this in their kitchens. Depends where they lived. If it was in Europe, it was the olive oil. If it was in the hotter climates, it was the coconut oil. So olive oil and coconut oil, they are the better oils. So your healthy fats. So you can do the equivalent to the Atkins on a plant-based diet. Let me show you. And we're going to go to Genesis 1:29. And in Genesis 1:29, God's telling Adam and Eve what to eat. And you can't improve on the Garden of Eden diet. And what does he say? He says, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed. So what's a herb-bearing seed? A herb-bearing seed is a grain. A herb-bearing seed is a legume. A herb-bearing seed is a seed. So let's have a look at the protein content of these and the carbohydrate content. But let's have a look at the grain first. So with the grain, we've got wheat, rye, barley, oats, amaranth, buckwheat, quinoa, spelt, so many grains. Grains are high in protein, but they are high in carbohydrate. Remember our carbohydrate list? Predominantly grain. What about a legume? Lentils, chickpeas, lima beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans, soy. Soy's only a problem if it's been genetically modified. Legumes are high in protein, but they are medium to low in carbohydrate. That's what a lot of people don't realise. In fact, they are about a third the carbohydrate content that you will find in the grain. What about a seed? Pumpkin seed, sesame seed, sunflower seed, chia seed, flaxseed or linseed. Seeds are high in protein, but they are quite low in carbohydrate. So God said, behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed and every tree, in the which of the trees a fruit-bearing seed. What's a fruit-bearing seed? That's your nut. Your nut comes from the fruit of the tree. So the fruit-bearing seed is a nut, and we have so many nuts. We've got cashew, we have almond, Brazil, hazelnut, pecan, or you call them pecan, walnut. High in protein, low in carbohydrate. So adhere to the type of program that Atkins was getting incredible results with his diabetics. We need to be having high fibre, there's all your plant foods. Generous proteins, so where are we going to get our proteins? The legumes, daily legumes. And seeds and nuts. Most people don't eat nuts for a month, buy a packet of cashews and eat the whole lot in a meal, is that right? Just have about 8 to 10 a meal. Lovely dessert to have a little handful of nuts after every meal. And some seeds. Sprinkle it through. There's lots of lovely dishes you can make with your seeds. So there's your proteins and your healthy fats. Your seeds and your nuts are excellent form of fibre, proteins and fats. And the last thing God said is the seed to you it shall be for meat. In other words, your main substance. And this is what Atkins found in his research, is that fibre, proteins and fats are the essential nutrients. That means you can't function without them. But what he found is that the carbohydrates are the non-essential. Do you know what that means? You can live without them. Now, let me very quickly say I'm not suggesting you do. And it's impossible to go on a no carbohydrate diet because carbohydrates are in all of the plant foods. It's the high that's the problem. That's the problem. And that's what's contributed to the diabetes we're seeing today. So let me tell you the story of a man named Bobby. He came to our retreat at Alabama a few years ago. He was 62. He said to me, I have spent $1 million on my health in the last 10 years. He said, the doctors have just sent me home basically saying we can do no more for you. He came from Florida. He was a wealthy man. He said, recently they took the lymph nodes out of my groin to see if they could find out why I've got diabetes. I can't quite understand that one, but that's what happened. The reason he came to our retreat is because he met a lady at the local swimming pool where their facility is, who said, I think I know a lady that can help you. And so he came to the retreat. When he came, he was in a wheelchair because the flight had caused his legs to swell so much because of the lymph nodes that had gone. He was on 90 units of insulin a day. He'd been diagnosed as type 1 diabetic. He was on high blood pressure medication. He was on blood thinning medication. He was on blood cholesterol medication. He just spent $800 on these bandages for his legs, hoping to try and contain them. So what I did was I said to him, I'd like you to get on the rebounder for 1 minute every hour and just do this. Feet don't leave the mat, just do this. Now what it does is the rebounder stimulates the lymphatic system, and that swelling was from his lymphatic system. Now even though the nodes are gone in his groin, he's still got them in his neck, he's still got them under his arm, and that can stimulate these other lymph nodes to start to take up the slack, so to speak. I said to him, I'd like you to walk barefoot on the grass just for a few minutes, several times a day. That massages the bottom of the feet. I said, you will not be able to do the normal exercise with the other guests because we don't want you walking on those legs. He was with us for 2 weeks. Little by little, within, I think, 48 hours, those legs had gone right down. He was also having massages. Every meal, he'd say, Barbara, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Have a look at my plate. I said, yeah, it looks pretty good. You got 2 potatoes there. Why don't you just have 1? Have a bit more sweet potato. He said to me, anything you tell me, I will do. And he did. Diligently. At the end of 2 weeks, he was taking 10 units of insulin a day. Do you remember how much he was taking when he came? 90 units of insulin a day. He'd been listening to the nutritionist he went to that told him to eat whole wheat bread, whole wheat cereal, whole wheat. What's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. But he didn't know what else to do. So why does the nutritionist tell this? Why isn't what I'm telling you known? Well, how much wheat does America grow? What do they want you to eat? That's a big job to change that whole thing around. It's huge. I can't even get my mind around it when you look at the farmers and the money that they've put into that huge equipment to harvest the wheat. Oh, that's a difficult problem, isn't it? He was a very excited man when he went home. I think just in that 2 weeks, he'd lost quite a bit of weight. He'd lost about 30 pounds, and that sounds like a lot, but when you remember that the swelling in the legs, he'd lost a lot of fluid, that made up for a lot of the weight. So it's unusual for someone to use that much weight, but when you consider the swelling in his legs, it's understandable. He emailed me 3 months later. He said to me, I am off all my medication. He said, I have lost now, I think he'd lost something like 60 pounds. He said, I swim 30 laps a day. I cycle 6 miles a day. I'm on the rebounder every day. They're the only 3 types of exercise he can do. Because if he does too much on his legs because of the loss of his lymph nodes, they will swell. He will ever be managing them. But he said, I'm managing them well. He's 62, his wife's 42. When he got home, she said, this is your baby. I like my champagne and my coffee and my croissants. After 3 months, she looked at her husband. He wasn't as impatient anymore. You see, when the blood sugar levels go up, the person's impatient. When they drop, they're impatient. And we have found that when people start to balance their blood glucose levels down, it's almost as if their personality changes a bit, because their brain is getting this nice, consistent delivery of fuel. So his wife became interested. She said she's interested now. Do you know that's the best way to interest your family, is what they see happening in you? He said to me, my doctors are astonished. Do you remember what his doctors had just said? Now, he's a wealthy man. He has the top specialists. They had basically sent him home saying, we can do no more for you. He's the CEO of some big companies. He was starting to retire. He said, I've gone back to full-time work. He said, I've got it back into the office and says, I'm back, watch out. He emailed me another few months later. He'd lost even more weight. He sent me a photo. We could hardly recognise him. All the puffiness had gone out of his face. He said, my wife is very happy. She's just lost 20 pounds in the last 6 weeks. She's gone out and bought some new outfits. You see, true beauty comes from within. True beauty is shiny hair and clear skin and clear eyes because of the type of food that we're eating. And his wife was beginning to understand this. She didn't need to use as much makeup. And because her body was now strong and fit and slim, she didn't need to cover it with lots of fancy clothes. She could go to simple clothes. It's an incredible story. One man said, Barbara, you've got so many success stories. Do you have any failures? I said, the failure is only on the person. The failure to do what you've got to do to get the results. So Bobby knew that his life was at an end if he didn't do something. And he just did it. And when he said to me, whatever you tell me to do, he said, I'll do it. Well, he was right. Does he still eat like this? He's relaxed his diet a little bit. He eats a lot more fruit now than he used to eat. But he said, I have kept to 2 meals a day. Now, what are diabetics told to eat? All day long. But when you are eating this, remember these foods give a lovely, slow, but sure, but constant delivery of fuel. And the salads and the vegetables you eat and the fruits, they'll give the quick high, so you've got a combination of some delivering straight away, but some delivering constantly and surely the whole time. We also had a young man named Dan do our program. He was 19, and he had diabetes since he was 16. He'd had a serious chest cold, and the doctor had put him on 2 very strong antibiotics at once that had damaged the beta cells in his pancreas. So he got diabetes. He said to me that the doctor said that his pancreas basically was dead. I said, what's dead? Is it gangrene? You can't get part dead or what's dead? I said to him, if there's blood going through your pancreas, there's life. He said, well, I'm just telling you what the doctor said. I said, let's see what we can do. So Dan, he wanted to conquer this. He's only 19. So he did exactly what we advised. He was with us 4 weeks, 2 weeks in the garden and 2 weeks in the retreat. And he told me this story 3 weeks later after he began. He said, the first week that I was at Misty Mountain, if I got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night, I'd take a candy or a lolly. He said that would get it up, but I always got a headache. When it goes up high, it often gives a headache. He said, I felt a bit guilty by the second week that I shouldn't be doing that. And he said, and there's no corner shops at Misty Mountain, we're way out in the bush. So he said, on the second week, if I got a blood sugar level low, I'd eat an apple. Now, it takes a long time to eat an apple in the middle of the night, doesn't it? He said that would get it up, but I wouldn't get a headache. He said the third week, after hearing your lectures the second time and understanding them a little bit more, I decided if I got a blood sugar level low in the middle of the night to do 30 push-ups. He would do 30 push-ups and his blood sugar came up. Where'd that come from? These glycogen stores. He's told me that he got up one morning. Now, I'm not sure on the American standard. I'm going to give you Australian. So Australian blood sugar levels should sit at about anywhere between 5.5 and 6.5. Well, he got up one morning and his blood sugar levels were 3. That's almost passing out. So he had the salt and the water, put his shoes on, had a bit more salt and a bit more water. And then he went for a run up and down the hills of Misty Mountain. When he came back, he tested his blood sugar levels and they were 9. Where did that come from? It's the glycogen stores. And remember, if you run out of them, the body's got the fat stores. So if it runs out of these, it's got these. Now, I call these the kitchen cupboards. These are the kitchen cupboard stores. My daughter lives in Wisconsin. She's got 7 children. She's got, a nice supply in her kitchen cupboards. But when they run out, she sends the children down to the basement, and, well, she's got 2 big freezers down there. She's got a pantry full of all her preserves. So these are the basement stores. That's the way God made the body. We've got stores there. And how do you release those two? The salt and the water and the exercise will do it. In fact, do you know what he came to me and said? Why didn't anyone tell me about glycogen? Do you remember what I called it? The diabetic's best kept secret, already in the muscle cell, just waiting to be plucked. Dan was diagnosed as type 1 diabetic. He came to us on 90 units of insulin a day. He went home on 10 units of insulin a day. Very, very similar to Bobby. Bobby was with us only 2 weeks and was getting those results. Why was Dan getting blood sugar level lows in the middle of the night? He was on too much insulin. Insulin has a one-set mind. I must just get that down. I have to get it down. And when it gets it down, where does it put it? Into storage. Just the storage. Don't you love the fact that it is so simple? It is incredibly simple. So what I say to people, if you have diabetes, try it. The Bible says in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. Dan proved it. Bobby proved it. So guess what? They just stick to it. So was Dan's pancreas dead? No. The fact that he kept getting blood sugar level lows kept meaning he's on too much insulin and his pancreas is starting to work. So Leviticus 17:11 says the life of the flesh is in the blood. If there's blood going in, there's life going in there. I know what the doctor meant. He meant that the beta cells were not working. That's basically what he meant. I believe that it is up to us to shock our health professional by showing them that we can do this. So we're going to have a break now. The time is 6:15. Before we have the break, maybe there's a couple of questions that people may have regarding this, yeah?
I have a patient who told me when I told her to use the Celtic salt, she said that she talked to a nutritionist who told her that Celtic salt is dirty.
Okay, now the question was that a lady was told not to use the Celtic salt because it's dirty. It's grey. But you know what the colour is? Minerals. Have you seen what the ocean does? It's constantly pounding, and that purifies the water. Now, heavy metals and mercury, things like that get into the sea, they sink. They're not in the water. They sink. Now, they don't gather the water to make the Celtic salt. They don't gather it near the sewage outlet. That would be dirty. So there's common sense there, but the water, because of the pounding of the sea and because of where they harvest it, it is not dirty. But I like the way the Bible says, prove all things, try it. Try it, you've got nothing to lose. Yes? What about Himalayan salt? That's a good question. Celtic salt has 82 minerals and Himalayan salt has 75 minerals. So I prefer the Celtic salt because of the higher mineral content. And in my next presentation after the break, I will show you exactly what those minerals are and the effect that they have. But if the Himalayan salt's all you can get, it's certainly better than the table salt, which only has 2 minerals. Yes?
I had a question about sprouted wheat.
Sprouted wheat.
Yes.
When you eat sprouted wheat, you don't have the problems of the wheat, because when you sprout wheat, you bring it back to a grass.
Okay, so it would be okay to do just regular red, what is that called? Red wheat? Red berry wheat.
Yeah.
That's sprouted. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Yes, in January of this year, I had a 5 bypass surgery, and I love what you're presenting here. We've been following you online. Is there anything in particular that I could do to get off the remaining 3 medications that I'm on? High blood pressure, what is it? Cholesterol medication, and I'm just wondering if there's anything in particular you would suggest to get off, that I could eventually get off of those.
It's a very good question. It's a question that several have, and I've got some good news. My next presentation will answer all your questions.
You referred to Genesis 1:29, every herb-bearing seed. Would that include your greens, leafy green vegetables? You mentioned it being wheat-bearing grains and.
Yes. Well, what you'll find is, as you go through Genesis, after the fall of Adam and Eve, that the thistles of the fields were introduced for the healing. So some Bible studiers believe that that's when God brought in the herbs of the field, was the green leafies then.
Since you don't have a presentation on cancer, I've got multiple myeloma, very aggressive form of cancer, just gone through about a year of chemotherapy, and because I was on a whole foods plant-based diet, no sugar, no refined carbs, and no dairy, no animal proteins, and I was feeling really great, but the cancer had deposited all this calcium into my kidneys, causing my kidneys to fail. And so I ended up spending 2 months in the hospital for kidney failure with kidney dialysis, plasmapheresis, and chemotherapy. And then just went through stem cell therapy, stem cell replacement therapy. And the problem is the last dose of chemotherapy that they gave me completely replaced the whole lining of my digestive system from my mouth to my butt. And I still have problems finding the foods that will help that gut heal.
Yeah, there's a very good herb. There's 2 herbs that can heal the lining of the gut. And they're both a little bit slippery and sliming, just like the lining of the gut. But both of these herbs contain growth stimulants. One, slippery elm. It's the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. And a spoonful of that can be taken in half a cup of hot water and mixed very well and thrown down before each meal. And the other herb that contains the growth stimulant is aloe vera. So both of these have the ability to heal the lining of the gut. So in your situation, if I was you, I would take that 3 times a day before every meal, and also before bed at night. And between meals, I'd also drink some aloe vera juice. But you would have to be careful. I'm sure your body quickly tells you if you've eaten a food and it doesn't like. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. So that would quickly tell you that. Cancer, 3 things with cancer that we have found. We have many books by different doctors on cancer, and we have found that cancer hates. So I like to look at what it hates and what it loves. So we like to give the body everything the cancer hates, so it can't survive. It hates oxygen. So it's important to exercise every day, make sure you're breathing fresh air, and there's also hyperbaric oxygen chamber, those treatments, they can make a bit different. And it hates alkaline. Now later in the week I will be doing an acid alkaline lecture, and in that acid alkaline lecture I will be touching a little bit on cancer, because the cancer hates the alkaline diet, so we don't want that. And it loves an acid environment. In fact, it thrives in an acid environment. And it hates no glucose. And so, but it loves glucose. In fact, cancer cells consume 15 times the glucose of any other cell. And it loves no oxygen. So very important for the person who's conquering cancer to wear the mask as little as possible. The only way I could get on the plane was to wear a mask. So you're in the right state, Idaho. So of all the books that I have, and there are many different tangents, and you've probably heard of many areas, the apricot kernel seed, that's known to cook cancer, the hyperbaric chamber, and you can see why, and also IV vitamin C, so there's many areas that people cover, but I look at the three common denominators in all of these writers is this. So it's planning a diet around that. My book, Self-Heal by Design, we have some up the front. We're getting a few more coming. It basically has food programs in there to help conquer cancer, showing how you can get those glucose levels right down. And what cancer also loves, it feeds on chemicals and it feeds on waste. So it's important to clean the body up and detox, and important to live in an environment where there's no exposure to chemicals. And what I have found in my experience too is some people develop cancer after they've had a bad tooth. Root canal fillings, that's a dead tooth now, and sometimes an abscess can set up behind it and you don't even realise it because the nerve is gone, and so those poisons can be little by little going into the body. So there's all, we like to put the detective hat on and find out how did all this begin, and often you can start to see some links.
What are your thoughts on leavened bread or true sourdough?
Sourdough bread? What was the first one?
Leavened, naturally leavened bread.
Oh, naturally leavened bread. Yeah, the sourdough bread is my bread of choice, and the reason why I eat sourdough bread is that's the bread that has been used for centuries. And the couple of stories that Jesus gave, he says, "Know ye not that a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump?" He's referring to sourdough. And he said the kingdom of heaven is like a woman that took a little piece of leaven and put it in the flour, and it leavened the whole lump. And the children of Israel, when they were in the desert for 40 years, they celebrated the Passover every year, and they had to put all the leaven out of their homes. Have you ever wondered what the leaven was? It was their little bowls of sourdough. So the sourdough bread is the best bread because it's a cultured bread. And the culturing process breaks down the protein or the gluten in the grain, making it pre-digested. So when you eat the sourdough bread, you're eating a bread that is a lot easier to digest. So that's the bread that we use of choice. So we'll make this the last one and then we'll have a break.
So I have two questions. One is it possible if you are eating high glycemic foods, lots of carbohydrates and snacking throughout the day, can that cause like a pre-diabetic condition?
As you have seen by my illustration, absolutely.
Okay. And then my other question is, are you going to address gluten? That's kind of a hot topic right now.
Yeah, gluten I'll be addressing in more detail in the acid alkaline lecture, because the hybridization of the wheat created a wheat that is a lot more acid. So the non-hybrid ancient grains, they sit more on the alkaline side. So thank you for your attention. Please, we'll have a break. We'll have a break of about 20 minutes, and there are some books to look at, and maybe have a breath of fresh air. There's still a bit of sunshine out there and some water, and we will come back in about 20 minutes.
Hated, and so she's been doing chiropractic on him, helping with his neck, and it seems to help his behavior, his
that's good.
outburst. Seems
I've
like he
gotta
doesn't
start.
do the bagling thing. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that's why I was wondering if you did any
I
consultation.
can give you my email,
Okay.
but later. Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back, because everyone that has a heart should be here. And the proverb says, it's Proverbs chapter 4:23, it says, keep the heart with all diligence, because out of it are the issues of life. So that's two things we're looking at there, the heart. And what are the issues of life? Well, we looked at that earlier this evening. We looked at Leviticus 17:11, that the Bible says the life of the flesh is in the blood. So the blood is the life of the flesh. So when the Bible says, keep the heart with all diligence, because out of it are the issues of life, it's the pump, the heart, that pumps the blood through the whole of the body. And every part of our body is alive because of blood going through it. In Australia, we have huge sheep farms. Some sheep farms will be 10,000 acres, and they have thousands and thousands and thousands of sheep. So it's very, very hard to keep your eye on every sheep. And sheep have thick coats and thick tails. And what happens is, especially if there's been a bit of rain, that underneath the tail, with their droppings getting stuck on the wool and it gets moist, then the blowfly comes along and lays the maggots, and so they call it the fly blown. They get fly blown. So to get around this problem, they take the tails off the little lambs. And so when you've got thousands and thousands of sheep and thousands of lambs, the easiest way is to put a little rubber ring around the tip, the base of the tail. That's where the tail comes out. There's the tip down there. And it takes about a week and the tail falls off. So why does the tail fall off? Because it's now dead. Because what's the ring stopped? It stopped the blood. That's right, they stopped the blood. So the blood is the life of the flesh. So when we're looking at heart health, we need to look at two things. We need to look at the fluid that the heart pumps, which is the blood, and we need to look at the heart in itself. And the blood needs to be nice and thin to be able to be pumped efficiently. And the best blood thinner in the world is water. How do I know that? Well, at Misty Mountain Health Retreat, I used to give live blood analysis, and you take a drop of blood and you put it on the slide, and you put a cover slip on it, and you put it under the microscope, and it comes up on a little television, and you're looking at blood. And whenever I saw blood clumped together, so blood should be swimming around like this. And it swims around very fast. Did you know it takes 1 minute for one drop of blood to go around the whole body? But sometimes when I looked at the blood, the cells are like this. They're all clumped together in these big, long shapes. So I would say to the person, have you had any water to drink today? And they would say, no. I haven't drunk water because I was travelling and I didn't want to keep stopping for a bathroom. And I'd go, aha. Well, unfortunately, it's very difficult for me to look at your blood. We'll look at it in a few more days because it's all clumped together. I can't get a good look at the shape, the size, the cell, how it moves around, because the blood's just all clumped. And I was looking at a lady's blood one morning and it looked like this. And I said, it was 9 o'clock in the morning. I said, have you had any water to drink today? She said, no. And it was 9 o'clock in the morning. When we wake up in the morning, that's the most dehydrated time of the whole day, because we lose moisture in the night. Have you ever slept on a mattress on the floor and in the morning you pick the mattress up and it's moist underneath? That's why beds have slats, don't they, so that the moisture is evaporated. I said, what have you had this morning? She said, I've had a cup of tea. Now, tea contains dehydrating agents. Tannin and caffeine are both dehydrating agents. And if you put a teaspoon of sugar in that, you've got another dehydrating agent. So she woke up in the morning and had a cup of tea. She woke up in the morning dehydrated. She had a cup of tea and it dehydrated her even more. How many people I see when I'm traveling and in hotels, they wake up to a cup of tea or a cup of coffee? I said, what else have you had today? She said, an apple and a banana. Now, an apple and a banana both have fluid in them, don't they? But when you're dehydrated and your digestion uses water to make the digestive juices, it's even more dehydrated. She said to me a few weeks later when I saw her, she said, I'm drinking my water. She said, every time I think, if I haven't drunk enough water, I think of my blood. All clumped together. Now, over 12 years of doing live blood analysis, sometimes to 12 people a week, I've seen hundreds of blood slides. And almost without exception, the only time I see that clumping together is if the person's dehydrated. So that's how I can tell you, I know that the best blood thinner is water. Water and water alone is your best blood thinner. But I'm going to look at another couple of blood thinners. Another blood thinner. And this is important because I don't know if you've ever tasted blood, but it's salty. I know if you've ever had, a tooth come out and you taste a bit of the blood, it's salty. So not only do you need water, and the rule of thumb is this, is 25, I have to do pounds. I'm used to kilos. So 50 pound, to every 50 pound, that's 1 quart. So 1 quart is 4 glasses, is that right? Yep. So that's your rule of thumb to how much water a person needs, and salt. And of course, if someone's got high blood pressure, what are they told? Don't have salt. So let's look at salt. By the way, this website that I've put up here, this is a young man named Tristan, and he has a bakery business, and he makes the most beautiful sourdough bread I have ever tasted. And you can Google him, and he will ship anywhere in the US. He's got 4 children. It's a family business. I love supporting family business. So he does gluten-free bread, and he also does the ancient grain breads. So seawater. Seawater contains 92 minerals. Of those 92 minerals, 30% is sodium and 50% is chloride. And so when the water is evaporated from seawater, the first crystals formed is sodium chloride. So what man does is he scoops that up, hasn't got time to wait for the rest, bleaches it white, puts aluminium with it, there's your table salt. Table salt has 2 minerals, and table salt is a dangerous salt. So the Bible says in Matthew chapter 5 verse 13, ye are the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. I love the old English, the poeticness. If the salt has lost its savour, I'd like to suggest that this salt here has lost its savour. It's lost most of its minerals. Look what the Bible now says. It's now good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men. My daughter in Wisconsin, when I was there one winter, I see they throw the salt on the road. Is that right? To melt the ice? Maybe they do it here too. And that's where I thought of that verse. So the Bible talks of salt, but it definitely defines that there is a salt that is not good. So the salt that we use is Celtic, and Celtic salt contains 82 minerals, and the Himalayan salt, it contains 75 minerals. So that's still pretty good. Still better than 2. So with the Celtic salt, where are the other 10? They're in such pico proportions that's barely measurable that it's inevitable that some are going to be lost in the evaporation process. Now that Celtic salt contains 3 magnesiums, and this is very important for the heart, because the heart, it pumps basically under the action of 2 minerals. Calcium contracts, magnesium relaxes. Calcium contracts, magnesium relaxes. And when the blood pressure is monitored, so what would be a normal blood pressure? Maybe 120 over 75. The 120 mark is called the systolic, and the, say, 70-75 mark is called the diastolic. Now that bottom reading is the heart at rest. And if that bottom reading goes above 90, then the doctor gets concerned, because that's the heart at rest. So they more concentrate on that bottom reading than the top reading, because if the heart at rest is high, that's what you don't want. And so what can relax that heart at rest is magnesium. So the 3 magnesium are magnesium chloride, magnesium bromide, and magnesium sulfate. Magnesium is a water-hungry molecule. And that's why if you have a packet of Celtic salt and it's been raining a lot, have you noticed the salt gets really wet? Because there's 3 magnesiums in it. Magnesium is a water-hungry molecule. So let me show you how this works. Here is the cell, and the cell has a bilayered membrane around it. And when we put a crystal of Celtic salt in our mouth, the mucous membranes absorb the minerals, the blood picks it up, it takes the magnesium to the cell, and then you have a glass of water, and that magnesium pulls the water inside the cell. It's the quickest way to hydrate a body, is that salt. The only time someone can drink too much water is if they're drinking huge amounts of water without having that little bit of salt. Dr. Robert Thompson, in his book, The Calcium Lie, he states that a little crystal of salt before every glass of water, so that would be, say, 8 times a day, he says all you're doing is replacing the minerals you lost yesterday. Where do we lose the minerals? When we perspire, when we urinate. All the body fluids that come out, they're salty. Now, I'm not suggesting you taste your urine, but it is salty. We know our tears are salty if they run down into our mouth. We're salty people. Dr. Lelangry, a French doctor who wrote a whole book on salt, he calls it our internal sea. Seawater is called an isotonic solution because it is the exact same mineral balance and proportion as is found in body fluids, as is found in the bones. And the Navy, in the war, they used to transfuse with seawater because the body converts it quite quickly to blood, because it is the exact same mineral balance and proportion as found in the body. That's why the Bible says if the salt has lost its savour, in other words, don't let the salt lose its savour. We need to be having salt the way God made it, which is in the seawater with all of its minerals. The good news is you don't have to drink seawater. You can have the whole salts. So there's salt and there's salts. Calcium is a very important mineral. It's called the king because when calcium gets in, all the other minerals piggyback on the back of calcium. But calcium can't get into the cell by itself. It needs vitamin D. When vitamin D is present, calcium with all the minerals gets pulled into the cell. And unfortunately, people have been scared away from the sun. But God put the sun in the sky, and it's there for a reason. You possibly have seen some presentations by a few doctors that are saying that vitamin D deficiency is a contributing factor in people getting sick with the COVID. So we need the sunshine, and your body stores sunshine very well. The darker the skin, the more sunshine you need and the more sunshine you can bear. So especially living up in these northern states of the US, you need to be getting a lot of sunshine in these summer months. And when the winter months come, please get outside as much as possible. And we just looked at the fact that glucose can't get into the cell by itself. Glucose needs insulin. When insulin's present, the glucose can get inside the cell. Now let's say someone is not drinking enough water, they're not having the whole salt, and the water they have got can't get in the cell. And the person's scared of the sun, so they're not going outside, so the minerals and the calcium can't get in. They're on a high carbohydrate diet, not realising what that wheat and sugar's doing, and they're developing insulin resistance, so the glucose can't get into the cell. And the cell says, what are we going to do? I know, we'll just force it into the cell. What's that called? High blood pressure. So high blood pressure can be a result of, yes, dehydration, of mineral deficiency. High blood pressure can be a result of vitamin D deficiency. High blood pressure can be a result of the high carbohydrate, high sugar diet that we just talked about. So with high blood pressure, there's more than meets the eye in the possible causes. Now, the reason why table salt definitely can contribute and even cause high blood pressure is this. In the membrane around the cell, there are sodium-potassium pumps. You see, the highest concentration of mineral outside the cell is sodium, and the highest concentration of mineral inside the cell is potassium. There is a little bit of sodium inside the cell, but it's mostly potassium. So these sodium-potassium pumps, they're basically going like this all the time, keeping the balance of sodium and potassium. The highest source of potassium is your fresh fruits and vegetables. So when you're eating fresh fruits and vegetables every day, you're getting a nice amount of potassium. Cooking does not destroy the minerals. The only time you'll destroy the minerals if you throw the water away that you cook the vegetables in. I like to use the waterless cooking, so that, or a very tiny little bit of water and a well-fitting lid, so by the time the vegetables are cooked, there's no, you've lost nothing. So sodium is the third most vital element needed for life. The most vital element needed for life is oxygen. The second is water, that's not a surprise. But the third is a surprise to most, and that is sodium. Whether you are an ant or a flea or an elephant or a lion or a human, the four most vital elements needed for life are these. But let's say someone's not having any fresh fruit and vegetables. They're sprinkling table salt on everything they eat. Those two minerals are so harsh, if you were to inject them straight into the veins of a person, you'd kill them. Those two minerals are so harsh that they kill the taste buds. Have you seen some people? They don't even taste the food, and they're putting salt all over it. No wonder their taste buds are dying. Whereas these whole salts, they enhance the flavour of the food. They bring out the flavour in the food. What's tomato and avocado on sourdough spelt toast if you don't put salt on it? No, our palate tells us we need that little bit of salt. And so when someone is eating like that, and many are eating like that in ignorance, sodium levels are rising because they're having an overload of that salt. Potassium levels are dropping. The sodium-potassium pumps are unable to keep the balance. And osmosis and diffusion happens when the highest concentration merges into the lowest. So what's happening now? Sodium levels are going too high inside the cell. That causes the cell to swell. There's your high blood pressure. So that's how the table salt contributes to high blood pressure. And so the person's told, stop the salt. Is that right? Stop the salt. So they stop the salt. Now sodium levels go too low. If that cell lacks sodium, it will explode. The human body runs according to precision balance. So the balance is vital. God put a whole lot of processes in place to try and maintain the balance. But unfortunately, many people are doing things not realizing that it is causing major imbalances. So the salt's important. We're looking at what we need to do to keep that blood nice and thin, and that is adequate water, the whole salt. Remember, there's salt and there's salts. Also, cayenne pepper. You'll get used to it. It might feel a little warm, but you'll get used to it. There's a book called Back to Eden by Jethro Kloss. You may be familiar with it. He devotes half a page to every herb except for cayenne pepper. 10 pages he devotes to cayenne pepper. And he quotes a couple of doctors in his writings. One doctor said it's impossible to abuse cayenne pepper. Another doctor said it will never cause a lesion. You know, a lesion is a sore or a wound. It might feel like it's burning, but it will never burn you. It stimulates. And some people say, well, aren't stimulants bad? Nervous system stimulants are, like your coffee, your alcohol, your drugs. But cayenne pepper stimulates blood. It's a blood stimulant. And what does Leviticus 17:11 say? The life of the flesh is in the blood. So then anything that stimulates blood is stimulating life. So it's great. If you're not used to it, start with 1/4 teaspoon 3 times a day. Build up to 1/2 teaspoon 3 times a day. It's a fantastic blood thinner. Cayenne pepper will do 3 things. Thin the blood, open the capillaries so you get a better delivery of blood all through the body, and it strengthens the arterial walls. So that's the 3 things cayenne pepper will do. So it's an excellent herb for the heart, for the blood vessels that are carrying the blood all through the body. Another excellent blood thinner is garlic. In fact, there's been quite a bit of research done on that. And ginger. So grate ginger in all your stir fries, in your legume dishes, grate it up, pour boiling water on it, let it cool a little, drink it for a tea. That's my favourite tea. So you can have ginger in many ways. So they're excellent blood thinners. If someone is on blood thinning medication and they start to do this, the blood could get too thin. Because drugs have a one-set mind. I must thin the blood, whether you need it or not. Whereas Psalm 104, verse 14, the Bible says that God gave herbs for the service of man. So what the herbs do is they work with your body needs. So you could take 10 quarts of water a day, 1/2 cup of salt a day, half a cup of cayenne pepper, I'm being extreme here, 10 cloves of garlic, 8 inches of ginger, and your blood will never get too thin. So I'm just using an extreme example to show you that's not the way the herbs work. Medicine calls it synergism. So herbs work with the needs of your body, whereas drugs do not. They just say, get out of my way, I've got a job to do, whether you need it or not. So if someone is on blood thinners and they start doing this, ideally they need to be tested regularly because the blood will get quite thin. Because of the blood thinners, the medical blood thinners. So the blood thinners are important. So I'd like to talk to you about another issue now, which is what we are told is the number one cause of heart disease. We are told that the number one cause of heart disease is cholesterol. Yeah? Cholesterol. So let me give you a few facts on cholesterol. F-A-C-T, facts. 80% of the cholesterol that our liver makes, and our liver makes cholesterol, and by the way, it makes cholesterol according to the body's needs. 80% of the cholesterol that the liver makes is made from glucose. And 20% of the cholesterol that the liver makes is made from fat. Now, just this piece of information alone tells us it's not the butter on the bread, it's the bread under the butter. In fact, fat has been shot not because of what it is or what it does, because of who it's hanging around with. That butter's hanging around with so much bread, and that olive oil's hanging around with so much pasta. Can you see that? So there are two main types of cholesterol. One is high-density lipoprotein, or HDL, and it's called the good guy because it carries excess cholesterol back to the liver. The other cholesterol is LDL, low-density lipoprotein, and it's called the bad cholesterol, but the body doesn't make bad things. It has a role, and its role is that of a repairer and a rebuilder. That's what it is, and that's what it does. It also does something else. It delivers cholesterol to the brain, and the brain loves cholesterol. The brain is the fattiest organ in the body. We had a midwife do our program, and she was in her 80s, and she'd worked in Africa for 20 years. She said, we had a problem for a while of babies' brains not developing well. So we investigated and discovered that the mothers were watering down the powdered milk. And what was happening is the baby's myelin sheath, which is the sheath around the nerve cell, it wasn't developing properly because they weren't getting enough fat. The fattiest food on the planet is breast milk in that first few weeks of life. It's incredibly fatty. It's very high in fat and cholesterol because that developing brain cannot develop without sufficient fat. Let's go to the other end of life. In the 70s and 80s and 90s, what's happening to a lot of people in our society today? Alzheimer's, dementia in Australia, 1,700 cases of Alzheimer's is being diagnosed every week. That's scary, isn't it? And I haven't read about Alzheimer's in the Bible, have you? Except when Nebuchadnezzar ate grass for 7 years. Yeah? But he came back. No, God never meant brains to deteriorate. How long did some of those patriarchs live? Was 700, 800 years? No dementia, no Alzheimer's. No. There are factors that are coming in, and on Saturday morning when I talk about the brain, I'll be touching on it there. But one of them is this fat-free diet, which is a ludicrous diet, which is a crazy diet, which makes no sense at all, defies reason. Where did it come from? Well, it started in 1953. In 1953, And this man was a scientist from Minneapolis. He came up with the theory. His name was Ancel Keys. He came up with the theory that saturated fat causes heart disease. But it has never been proved. Never been proved. How crazy is that? In fact, we have a book and it's called The Great Cholesterol Con by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. He's a cardiovascular surgeon. And he quotes in his book Ancel Keys saying, "We're pretty sure the research will come." Is that science? That means anyone can come up with anything and then soon it'll be proved. Well, we're 68 years later, because that's the year I was born, it's still not been proved. And yet, do you know what's happening now? Alzheimer's, dementia, because brains are not getting the fat that they need. The membrane around every cell in the body is 50% fat, but not the brain cell. The membrane around the brain cell is 70% fat. And we'll be looking at brain cells on Saturday morning. Brain cells look like this, and they have a myelin sheath. See that? That's the fatty sheath. And that fatty sheath is what was deteriorating before it was even being developed in little babies because their milk didn't have enough fat in it. If you go into the supermarket and have a look, do an assessment of baby formulas, every baby formula will have either coconut oil or palm oil, a saturated fat, because the brain loves the saturated fat. I love the way the Bible sweeps the curtain aside, and the Bible talks about a great deceiver there, deceiving the whole world. And he seems to have deceived the whole world into thinking that fat is dangerous. It is not true. It has never been proven. So let's have a look at how these two work in the body. So here's a blood vessel. And because of its low density, LDL is always found on the edge. Because of its high density, HDL is always found in the middle. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride has written a book called Put Your Heart in Your Mouth. And she spends the first 3 chapters of her book where she's assessing this issue of heart disease, stroke, because you know it's the #1 killer in the world today. So there's quite a few doctors that have written books on it assessing the situation. And for the first 3 or 4 chapters, she looks at everything that damages the arterial wall. The arterial wall is made up of endothelium cells, and chemicals damage them. It is estimated that we are exposed to 100,000 new chemicals every year. And it comes in many ways. It comes coming in our food, in our shampoo, in our hair conditioner, in our toothpaste, in sometimes our clothes. And they're damaging the tissues. 4,000 chemicals in one cigarette. And these chemicals come in and damage the tissues. Heavy metals, those mercury fillings in the mouth. Do you know they were banned in America for 300 years? Mercury was banned in the fillings. In the early 1900s, three dentists came from Europe, started their own dental association, the ADA, the American Dental Association, and that association legalised mercury. See, at the time, there was the American Association of Dental Surgeons, which they said no mercury. Isn't that incredible? So why is it so popular? Because it's the only liquid metal, and it goes into your mouth in an amalgamation state, and it sort of settles into the tooth, and it's so strong and hard that it'll just about last forever. What a worry. And that mercury is constantly leaching. In fact, I was reading in one book about a man had a mercury filling in his mouth for 25 years. When it went in, it was 50% mercury. When they took it out, they tested it. It was now 25% mercury. Where's it gone? That's a little bit scary, isn't it? And we'll talk about that a little bit on Saturday morning when I talk about the brain. I'm looking at what causes damage to the arterial walls. What also can do mould. You know, the Bible says if your house is mouldy, you've got to get rid of it. And my book, Self-Heal by Design, it basically gives a history of mould and its dangers and how to eliminate it. So what's going to plug up the holes, students? The repairer and the rebuilder comes along and plugs up the holes. That's what it does. That's its job. Because if it didn't, the blood would bleed into the tissues. It's a process that God created. But the person doesn't realise what the chemicals are doing. They don't realise what the heavy metals are doing. They don't realise what the mould is doing, and so it continues. It's called atherosclerosis. You've heard of it? Something else is happening. There are little protein molecules floating through the bloodstream. And when someone's on a high carbohydrate, high wheat, high sugar diet, they've got excess glucose. And that excess glucose connects with the protein molecules and becomes sticky. And they stick onto the wall like this. So they are also contributing to it. But say we've got a narrow spot here and one dislodges and it sticks there. That's the number one cause of a heart disease, the number one cause of a stroke. Can you see there's quite a few factors coming in here? It's not just one thing, but it's multiple things. To say that cholesterol causes heart disease is like saying the fire trucks are causing the fire. Well, they must be causing the fire. Have you noticed they're always there? No, they're the one common denominator you'll always find at a fire, is the fire truck. You see the reasoning? So imagine Dr. Robert Atkins, when his patients are eating meat, butter, cream, cheese, eggs every day, and after a year their cholesterol levels have come down? How crazy is that? He didn't do it for this. He did it for weight loss. So when he went into the medical journals, this is in the 80s, 90s, and he discovered that there was research that showed that dietary cholesterol has little or no effect on blood cholesterol levels. I'll repeat that because that's quite a statement. Dietary cholesterol has little or no effect on blood cholesterol levels. The only place you'll find cholesterol is in meat and meat products, and that's what his patients were eating. Can you see why the body creates more cholesterol? The liver creates it to plug up the holes in the walls. In fact, HDL and LDL, they're your road maintenance team on your roadwork system, the highways through the body that are carrying the blood, the life of the flesh. So anyone that has a stroke or a heart attack, they are put on cholesterol-lowering medication, yeah? Probably the two most common are Lipitor and Crestor. Well, Lipitor and Crestor and all your statin drugs, they have side effects. Here are the side effects: muscle wasting, memory loss, Alzheimer's, dementia, and they've just added another one, which is breast cancer, because all our sex hormones are made from cholesterol. Did you hear all that? They're the side effects. And can you see why memory loss and Alzheimer's and dementia happen? Because our brain cells need that fat. A recipe for Alzheimer's is someone on cholesterol-lowering medication and on a fat-free diet being exposed to a lot of chemicals. Can you see that? That's a recipe for disaster. We have a book at home. It's called Lipitor, Thief of Memory. It's by Dr. Duane, who's a medical doctor and an astronaut. And he was, I think, early 50s, went to have a medical, and the doctor said, your cholesterol levels are a little bit high. Do you know what his cholesterol levels were? They were 200. Doctor said, your cholesterol levels are a little bit high, so I'm going to put you on cholesterol-lowering medication. He said, okay, doc. Lipitor. 6 weeks later, his wife found him out in the garden. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who she was. Well, the only thing that had changed was the medication, so he stopped the medication and took a few days, and he became lucid again, which in 2 weeks his mind was clear again. Went back to the doctor a year later to have his yearly medicals. Doc said, your cholesterol levels are still a little bit high. I want you to go back on the medication. And he said, I'm not going back on that. I went mad on that. Doctor said, that's very rare. He said, well, what about half dose? He said, all right, I'll go on half dose. No one wants to die of a heart attack or a stroke. 6 weeks later, his wife found him out in the garden. Didn't know who he was, didn't know where he was. Stopped the medication, and he wrote up his story and put it on a website that looks at, drug adverse effects. They said, wow, can we put this out there? This is quite a story. Within hours, hundreds of hits of people saying the same thing happened to me. Yeah. If you stop cholesterol-lowering medication tonight, there will be a side effect tomorrow. Your memory will return. You can be on the medication. Let's say someone's been on it for 5 years and they stop immediately. That's the only side effect? I think the great deceiver's trying to take human beings' minds down. Let's look at the cholesterol levels. It was about 5 years ago. I was running a retreat in Alabama, and there was a nutritionist there. She was 69. She said, I'm still working as a nutritionist. I work for a doctor part-time. I work for a hospital part-time. She said, I was trained in university 40 years ago, and 40 years ago we were told that a cholesterol level of 300 was perfectly normal. 300 and under. So can you see what they've done to try and lower heart disease? They've lowered the figures. Has that helped? No. Has the fat-free diet helped? No. It's made no difference at all. So they stopped the butter and said everyone had to eat margarine. Has that helped? Not at all. In fact, cancer rates have come up almost neck to neck now with heart disease. The whole world's just shut down over something where 99% of people recover from, and yet this doesn't even be seen to be looked at. And yet this is the number one killer. So if someone says to me, Barbara, my cholesterol levels are 250, I say, great. The Framingham Heart Study was set up to prove that cholesterol causes heart disease. And it went over 30 years. It's still going. 30,000 people, some die, more come on. But it has not proven that cholesterol causes heart disease. It hasn't proven that at all. But what it did prove is that if you have high cholesterol levels, you will not get Alzheimer's. Because our brain needs cholesterol. In fact, that fatty substance is mostly cholesterol. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, in his book, The Great Cholesterol Con, he said, for the first time, normal levels of a normal vital body substance is being called a disease. So here's the name of some of the books. I think you've got it written in your program. The Great Cholesterol Con by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. The Great Cholesterol Lie by Dr. Dwight Lundell, both cardiovascular surgeons. Dr. Dwight Lundell has performed 10,000 bypasses, and he's written an ebook, The Great Cholesterol Lie. The Great Cholesterol Deception by Dr. Peter Dingle. The Great Cholesterol Myth by Johnny Bowden. We're running out of names. You know what God said in 2 Timothy 1 verse 7? He says, I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. The sound mind considers these things. That's why you're the doctor. So I'm in New Zealand. I'm in Invercargill a few years ago now, and I gave a presentation on heart health covering the cholesterol like I have tonight. It was Tuesday night. So we're looking at Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. A man came to see me just before the lecture. He looked like he and his wife were both in their late 70s. He said, "We've got a story for you." She said, "My wife, she's been on Lipitor for 10 years. He said, "Her mind is failing. We find her outside. She doesn't know where she is. We're finding it hard to keep tabs on her. She irons but leaves the iron on and it nearly burnt through all of these things are happening." He said, "So we made a decision that we think that it's safest to have her in an aged care facility." He said, "We heard your presentation. We stopped the Lipitor." He said, "It's 3 days." He said, "I've got my wife back." And they both had tears in their eyes. Wow. How many people in aged care facility, their dementia and their Alzheimer's is from this cholesterol-lowering medication they're on when there is no proof that it causes heart disease, and yet look at the side effects. That's why we should be our own doctor. So that's one medication that can be stopped right now with no side effects at all. Except that your memory will return and you'll be able to build up your muscles again now. One lady had a stroke and she said to me, "I can't understand it." She said, "I've got to now build my muscles up, but I'm on Lipitor and I can't build my muscles up while I'm on the muscle-wasting drug." It doesn't make any sense at all. So cholesterol's important. Our vitamin D is made from it. Our sex hormones are made from it. So with Ansel Keys, he looked at a whole lot of countries. He kept eliminating countries that didn't support his theory. He had to eliminate the Maasai. Do you know what Maasai live on? Blood, meat and milk. 0 heart disease. So if saturated fat caused heart disease, wouldn't they be dying like flies? So of course he had to eliminate that. That's not true science. True science looks at everything. So let's strengthen the heart. How to strengthen the heart? Number 1, there are things that should be eliminated. What should be eliminated? Please, margarine. It's a toxic fat, it's a dangerous fat. It's not a fat that God made. In fact, your body can handle butter better than that. What do I put on my bread? Olive oil. What does my husband put on his bread? Avocado. Don't they call it God's butter? It's a toxic fat. Eliminate the chemicals out of your home. Many people go home from here, get the magnifying glass, because you almost need it, to look at the fine writing on the laundry detergent, on the washing up liquid. What's in your shampoo? Well, there are so many hidden chemicals coming in. Careful what's touching your skin. It should only be natural fibres, your cottons, your silks, your wools. And you can get nice fine wool that doesn't prickle. Now, there are some fabrics that are made from wood pulp. One is Modal, M-O-D-A-L. It's the cellulose spun from the birch tree. Viscose, rayon, they're from wood pulp. You can get clothes now out of bamboo, also out of hemp. So the 3 to be cautious of are acrylic, polyester and nylon. Acrylic, polyester and nylon are all plastic fabrics, so they're basically fabrics made out of chemicals. Particularly careful on what's touching your skin, because our skin is like lots of little pores that absorbs. Also, the table salt, absolutely. This is one area where most doctors and I agree. Doctors don't study nutrition. The problem is not the doctor, the problem is the course. Now, they take the Hippocratical Oath when they become a doctor. But you know what Hippocrates said? Let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. So really, doctors, half of their course should be studying nutrition. There are some doctors certainly do know nutrition, but they've usually done their own course on nutrition. Dr. Robert Thompson, who wrote the book The Calcium Lie, when he did a nutrition course, his eyes were opened. He was about to get out of medicine because he said, I'm just frustrated because people aren't getting better. But 7 years is a long time, so he did a nutrition course. He said, my eyes were opened. We had a doctor from Fiji come and work with me for 2 weeks. She's called the nutritional doctor now. Eliminate the caffeine. Caffeine's well known to get that blood pressure up because it causes a crisis response in the body. And whenever a person has a crisis response, their blood pressure goes up to cope with the crisis. So caffeine's well known to get that blood pressure up. Also the hybridized wheat. Because the hybridized wheat is such an unusual structure, the body often gives a crisis response. And the two substances that are able to cause heart arrhythmia are these two. That's the unnatural heartbeat. Once the wheat is stopped, it can take at least 2 months to see a result. You can eat a slice of bread, it'll be out of your body in 24 hours, but the effect can remain for sometimes 2 months. So give it a bit of time. So we'll also say the high carbohydrate diet. And of course the high carbohydrate diet is usually mostly the hybridized wheat. So also important, the full hydration, we looked at that. Also important to have the whole salt. If you're not used to salt, if you've been told it's bad and you've eased yourself out of salt, start small. Start little by little to ease your body back into it. Number 4, the high-intensity interval training. The high-intensity interval training is one type of exercise that strengthens the heart more than any other type of exercise. It's that high intensity that strengthens the heart. So let me tell you a story of my son Peter. When he was 25, he was running up and down the hills behind Brisbane to train for a triathlon. He's a Tyler. And about after he'd been training for a few weeks, he had to take out this old vanity unit that had a big chip in it. It was very heavy, an old 50s one, and it slipped and hit his ankle. And I think if there hadn't been a bone there, it would have cut his foot off, but there was a bone there. And the blood hit the roof. And he yelled out to my son James, who was outside working with him. He said, "James!" Apparently James said, "I'm on the phone, mate." I tell you that so that you'll know it was a few minutes before James got in the room. And James said when he got in the room, the blood just spattered the roof and the walls, clamped it, put a pressure bandage on, took it to hospital. The nurses kept taking Peter's pulse. They couldn't believe it. 51 beats per minute. Why was it 51 beats per minute? He was running up and down the hills. The more you use the heart, the stronger it gets. But it's because his heart rate was 51 beats per minute that the blood hit the roof. If Peter's heart rate was 70 beats per minute, it would have just gone that high. His heart was so strong, it didn't have to beat a lot, because every beat was so strong and so powerful, it pumped a huge amount of blood. So let's pretend we've got a bathtub there. Now Peter's emptying the bathtub with a bucket. Boom, boom, gosh. Boom, boom, gosh. But at 70 beats per minute, they're emptying the bathtub with a little teacup. Boom, boom, gosh, boom, boom, gosh, boom, boom, gosh, boom, gosh. Which heart's going to wear out first? It is said we only have so many beats per lifetime. And it's the high intensity interval training that strengthens that heart. No one has ever had a heart attack doing this. But people have had heart attacks doing the 5K jog, but not the high intensity interval training. In that interval, in that recovery time, then the heart gets a little rest and comes back to normal. But when someone does the 5K jog, there's no rest times. We need those little rest times. Number 5, rest. Not negotiable, 8 hours. Got that? 8 hours. So you have a choice here. It can be 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., but not this week. It can be 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., or at a stretch, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Aren't you glad God gives us a choice? Now, if you're not used to that much sleep, you can train yourself into it. Because as I'll show you on Saturday morning, that some of the famous people who boasted on only 5 hours sleep a night, they spent the last 10, 20 years of their life with severe Alzheimer's and dementia. The brain needs rest. The heart, the whole body needs a rest every night. It's also important with this is not only the eliminating, not only keeping the blood thin, the water, the whole salt, but also proper diet. And the proper diet that we just looked at with diabetes is very good for also the heart. So this is high fibre, and the highest fibre foods are your vegetables. So what the heart loves is minerals. Vegetables are high in minerals, low in sugars. Fruit's high in sugars and low in minerals. So lots of vegetables. Also, your fibre. Well, there's your fibre there. So the minerals are important, the vitamins are important. So your vegetables, your fruits. If you've also conquering diabetes, go for your low GI fruits. High fibre, generous proteins. So your generous proteins are your legumes, your nuts, your seeds. In the back of my book, I've included some delicious recipes for legumes, because I find most people don't know how to make the legumes taste fantastic. And God gave us taste buds for a reason. At lunchtime today, we had one of the recipes in the book. We had the white beans, which was a cashew sauce with chickpeas and carrots and onion and cauliflower. And this beautiful creamy white sauce, just delicious. So there's lots of lovely ways you can do the legumes. So your legumes, your nuts and your seeds, and your nuts and seeds also are giving you the third essential food group, which is fats. If fat did cause heart disease, then when white man hit the South Pacific Islands, the people would be dying like flies from heart disease and stroke. Is that right? Because they're eating coconut 3 times a day. But there was no heart attacks, there was no strokes. Because fat doesn't cause heart disease. Later in the work, we'll be looking at fats that heal and fats that kill, but the killer fats really are the altered fats. This one, the margarine. It actually contributes to heart disease because the chemicals in it continue to the damaging of the wall. And what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. So they've lowered the cholesterol levels. They've got half the people over 60 on cholesterol-lowering medication, telling people to stop butter and use margarine. And heart disease has not lessened. herbs. There is one herb that God made specifically for the heart. It's called hawthornberry. And the hawthornberry strengthens the heart. It grows very well in cold climates, and it's traditionally an English herb. Down the bottom of Australia, they introduced it for hedges, I think. It may grow around here. If it doesn't, it could, because it likes the cold climate. Now, the hawthornberry strengthens the heart. So if the blood pressure's low, it'll bring it up. And if the blood pressure's high, it'll bring it down. That's what the hawthornberry does. And if the heart is experiencing heart arrhythmia, if these foods are stopped and the hawthornberry introduced, it can bring that heartbeat back to normality. Remember Psalm 104, verse 14, God gave herbs for the service of man. And the hawthornberry is very safe. At Misty Mountain, we have a tablet that is 1,060 milligrams to one tablet. So we suggest when someone's taking it to have maybe that 3 times a day. And if they feel that that's still not having enough, they can do 2 tablets 3 times a day, because that is a very safe herb and it can be used in conjunction with medication. It won't cause a problem at all. That's the good news. So I want to give you the story of Henry. Henry came to our retreat. He was 68. He was carrying about 40 kilos or 80-pound excess weight. He was on medication for blood sugar, blood pressure, blood cholesterol and blood thinning, and he was on cholesterol for gout, and he was also on cholesterol for stomach ulcers. I said to him, "Are you interested in coming off any of your medication?" He said, "No, thank you very much. I'm very happy with my medication, and I respect everyone's God-given right, to choose what goes into their body." We put him on the hawthornberry tea. And you can make the hawthornberry tea by, I think it's 2 teaspoons of the dried berries to a cup of fluid, and you drink 4 cups of that a day. That's what we were giving him. And being a dried berry, you give it a gentle simmer for about 10 minutes. Let it cool. When he left, he said, "Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed my week." Very well-spoken man. He'd been a High Court judge. He rang me 4 months later. He said, "Barbara, I'd like to visit you and get some more hawthornberries. I want to get some of my friends off their medication." Now, as a High Court judge, he rubbed shoulders with a lot of other judges and doctors. I said, "Come for lunch, Henry." When Henry knocked on the door and I opened it, I could hardly recognise Henry. So in 4 months, he had lost 40 pounds. The puffiness had gone out of his face. He said, "Look, I can do my coat up now." I said, "You're looking good, Henry." He said, "I'm feeling good." He said, "Sit down, I have some stories for you. I went to the doctor recently to have my blood pressure taken, and the doctor took it and then got up to walk out." Henry said, "Where are you going?" He said, "The machine's broken." Henry said, "Why do you say that?" He said, "Well, this machine says that your blood pressure's 120 on 80. He said, "That's not your blood pressure. Your blood pressure, are you ready for this? On medication, it was sitting at 160 on 95. Henry said, "It's not broken. That's my blood pressure now." The doctor was surprised. He noticed that Henry looked different. He did a series of blood tests, and the doctor took him off all his medication because his blood sugar was normal. His blood pressure was normal. His blood cholesterol was normal. His blood sugars were normal. He had no more gout, and he also had no more stomach pain. I think this is a very interesting story because Henry stayed on his medication, but Henry did this and got the results. He proved to his doctor that he could do it. And the doctor had to take him off his medication, or his blood sugar would go too low, or his blood pressure would go too low, or and he'd start passing out. He wrote to me about 4 months later. He said, I don't know where you are now. We'd moved. He said, but I just wanted to tell you that I've now had 70-pound weight loss. Incredible story. And his doctor took him off his medication. When I was talking to him, I said, tell me what you're eating, Henry. He said, well, every morning I have a spaghetti bowl with chopped up fruit, whole grain cereal, coconut cream. Did you hear that? Yeah, a 40-pound lost on coconut cream every day. Chia seed and ground flax and nuts and seeds and a slice of sourdough spelt toast with avocado and tomato. Now, that's not a light breakfast, is it? He said, my next meal will be about 5.5 hours later. He said, he was a bachelor. He said, I always have a salad, then I have baked or steamed or stir-fried vegetables and some sort of protein. He said, I find if I cook a legume dish, it'll do me a few days. And sometimes I have a slice of sourdough toast with avocado and tomato. He's a very decisive man. He said, I do not eat again till breakfast. I said, tell me what your exercise program is, Henry. He said, I find I can walk another block every week. So as his weight goes down, as his body gets stronger, he can go further with less effort and less time. He said, my doctor told me that I don't have to have my total knee replacement operation now. See, knees don't like a lot of weight. Incredible story of an incredible body made by an incredible God who designed it to heal itself when you give it the right conditions. Remember what Henry said? I want to get some hawthorn berries for my friends. Unfortunately, not a lot of them took it up. They said, as if this could do it. But do you know what Henry had proven? He'd proven to them, and he'd proven to himself what this did. And I love that verse in the Bible. It's 1 Thessalonians 5:21, prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. Now, some people start it, but they're not getting results straight away. Well, you need to give it a little bit of time. Isn't that true? Because little by little, the body heals. Now, I have ended on time tonight, so I'm going to say a closing prayer, and we're going to be together all week, so if you have more questions, we'll have lots more time in our next few meetings. Father in heaven, thank you again for a body that's been designed to heal. I thank you so much for each one of us here. It is not by accident that we are each here. Not only do we thank you for this body, but we thank you for the principles that bring about the healing process, and we also thank you that it can be so simple. We also know that there are many methods of healing, but only one that you approve of. So we pray that you will bless every person here, give them wisdom as little by little they begin to implement these principles to get the results. And we thank you for hearing our prayer, for we pray it tonight in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. Now, I haven't got a program, but you have. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night, where we talk about tomorrow night's meetings. Yes, very important one, because we talk about the immune system, and also we're going to be talking specifically about COVID and what you can do to prevent and heal from it. So I'll see you tomorrow night.